Hey, how you doing? Lewis here for Storyblocks, and today we're looking at an exciting new feature recently added to DaVinci Resolve with their 20.2 update, and that is their AI Cinematic Haze tool. Apparently, with just a few clicks, you should be able to introduce volumetric haze, fog, mist to your scenes. Now, this has me excited because usually when you want to add some sort of volumetric haze or mist to your scene, you're going to have to gravitate to the path of simulation tools. I'm not that versed with that kind of stuff, so the possibility of being able to do it in Resolve with just a few clicks is exciting. Now, I've got a cup of coffee, I've got a glass of water. This is going to be a pretty long tutorial. We're going to cover a few things. We're going to run through the overview of the tool itself through a fictional scenario. We're going to stress test it, see what works, what doesn't, and then we're going to see how we can possibly bridge the best of both worlds with 2D assets and Resolve's new tool. So let's just jump in to DaVinci Resolve and ensure that you are on the color page, because this is a color page only tool. So our director has emailed in and they want this sequence to be more ominous. This character is sort of in a grave danger environment, so we need to visually show that. So let's go ahead and add the haze. We're going to go up to the effects panel, search for haze, and then we've got Resolve FX Light Cinematic Haze. Add that to a node, and in 3, 2, I didn't even finish my countdown, it's been added. And you know what? Right off the bat, without even adjusting any sliders, this looks great. It genuinely feels like, at least from my first impressions, that we are in a misty environment. And why is that? What is making this look so good? Well, we can see this by going up to the depth map preview. I'm going to toggle that on. And now we can see Resolve's neural engine at work in configuring the distances of the objects within this sequence. Now, if you don't know how a depth map works, essentially Resolve or any software configures the suggested data within the video composition as to how close and how far the objects are to the camera. The closer the objects are to the camera, the darker the objects are on screen, with black being the closest, and the furthest the objects are, the whiter they become, with white being the absolute furthest. So if you find that Resolve has possibly got this a little bit wrong, we could look to maybe bring the far limit closer. But there is an issue with that with this specific tool, is that if I turn off the depth map preview, we can see now it's just sort of giving it a washed, uncooked look, almost as if we've just got a log image itself. So we don't necessarily want to adjust the far limit, but let's say that we want to bring our character more into the scene, then we can adjust the near limit. So let's turn this back on, and I'm going to start reducing the near limit. And we can see, as I just noted, objects closer to the camera start to appear black. So we're telling Resolve now that you've got this a little bit wrong, and in fact we need the near limit to start over here. And if I turn off the depth map preview, it's quite a tongue twister, we can see that our character, in comparison to shifting it back on, is displaying a lot more contrast at the moment and is more visible. So this is a good setting to play around with if you feel like that your objects or your subjects are kind of falling too much into the haze. But for this sequence, because we want to install some horror, ominous tones, we're going to have her completely encased with the fog blanket. Underneath we have atmospheric scattering, and these are a few different parameters that can adjust how the fog interacts with the scene itself. So we have air light. In this specific example, it's how much influence the fog is having from the lights within the scene. Of course, for this specific angle, we're pointing upward towards the sky. There are no lights, but we do have these highlight regions. So if I were to increase this, we can see we kind of get more of a bloom where there's a diffused look to the fog. But I think it's a little bit too artistically influenced here rather than a more natural approach to the haze. So let's remove this. Then we have the density of the fog. Again, going to increase how dense the fog is. And underneath we have resolution loss. Now, one thing that 2D overlays don't necessarily have is the intrinsic values that you see when you're actually in a fog blanket. And they are a loss of saturation, exposure, clarity, visibility, and more so the further you look into a fog blanket, because you have those particles that start to become quite dense. Now, with this tool, what Resolve is doing, it's reducing the clarity of the objects in the distance according to the depth map. So if I start to reduce the resolution loss here, we can see that the objects in the background fall in and out of focus even further. In most instances, from playing around with this so far, I think just keeping it where it is a pretty good standpoint. And underneath we have light halos, but for this one, we're going to jump over to a clip I prepared earlier. So we have this cool aerial shot with the haze added of a German town that I've downloaded from the Storyblocks library, and we've introduced our haze to make this more of an ominous crime thriller opening. And if you have a look in this shot, especially if I start to zoom in towards the back, we can see, and if I knock this node on and off, how the haze effect is having a direct manipulation onto the lights themselves. Because if we think about it, that's what happens in real life, right? If we have a look at photos of fog, especially ones where there's, traffic lights or street lights, we can see how those light waves bounce through the atmospheric particles of the fog and illuminate those particles that surround the light. And this is what's happening here. And the light halo control parameters are just this, where we can change the size or maybe introduce a certain color to these lights. So this is something that's going to be very scene specific, not necessarily a parameter you're going to be touching all the time, but it does allow you to further manipulate the lights of your sequence without actually isolating them through the use of a mask or the color picker. With that said, let's jump back to our lady in the forest, and underneath we have light rays. Okay, so in classic director fashion, we have received an email, and in fact, the placement of this shot is going to be used later in the story when they've walked through the forest victorious after their battle with the dark forces, and they want to show that thematically and visually. How can we do that? Light rays. If you've ever seen a John Woo film, you will know what's the point in using haze if you're not going to use light rays. So all we do here is we enable the light rays and we change to from a location. And up here we have our icon, which we can drag along the viewer and pinpoint exactly where we want the light rays to come from. I think in this instance, I'm going to say over here on the left-hand side. I think it kind of lines up with the real life shadows. And if I click play, look at what happens. The light icon and the directionality of the light rays does not follow the scene. So in order to do this, we first need to add a tracking point for the Resolve FX to follow. So all we do is, if the tracker window is not open by default, it's this one in the dead center. We're going to select FX, and at the bottom, select Add Tracker Point. Where the blue cross appears on screen, just drag it up to the top. Resolve is pretty good with its tracking. It doesn't have to be too latched on to anything. And we're going to click track reverse, forward, and backwards. And through the power of video editing, if we now click play, we can see that the light rays stay locked in place from that light source, and it looks so good. And underneath we have a variety of different parameters, from changing the length of the light rays to increasing the softness or the hardness of the light rays themselves, and then the brightness and the saturation. But bear in mind that when you're playing around with the light rays, you are going to be lowering the intensity of the haze itself. So if you are looking for a more sinister and ominous looking composition, we should perhaps leave that turned off. And finally, underneath, we have air disturbance. And this setting essentially injects some organic life into the haze itself. Because if we think about it, it's not that often that we're in an environment in which the haze would be standing still, right? There would likely be some wind or some disturbance. So let's turn on enable disturbance. We can't really see what it's doing at the moment, so we're going to have to go to preview influence. And then we're going to bring up our depth map again. But this time, as we start adjusting the parameters, we can start to see it's kind of introducing a noise texture almost to the preview. And then to add further life into this, we can start messing around with the flow direction as well as the speed. So we're going to move from right to left on this. And what I recommend in doing is if you set a keyframe at the very start of your sequence, move all the way to the end and then adjust the flow speed, we can see through the depth map preview that there is a lot of organic natural movement now to this. So if I turn this off and go full screen, we can softly see this ambient haze moving through the sequence almost as if it's alive. And the way that it's working, it's affecting the draw distance and the visibility of the background, where there would be further buildup of that haze, which is just fantastic. Now, before we continue on to looking at some stress testing and what works and what doesn't, I don't know if you've noticed here, but if we look at my FPS, we're currently at 21 to 22 frames per second. And if I bring up my system performance, we can see that the GPU utilization is currently at 88%. Now I use an RTX 3080, so it's a few years old at the moment, but not necessarily that defunct, given it still goes for about $1,000 or more on the aftermarket. So I can usually edit 6K files without the need of having to create a proxy off the bat. But here, I'm not getting real-time playback. And this is a downloaded video file from the Storyblocks library. So it's not raw from the camera. I've not got grading on it. It's all finished and complete, ready to go. And I'm not getting real-time playback. So that tells us that this tool, like most of Resolve's neural engine tools, is quite processing hungry. And if you didn't know this, Resolve is a GPU first software. As a result, you're going to have to ensure that your system is somewhat up to scratch if you're looking to bring this in to your workflow. And that's the run-of-the-mill basics of using the Haze tool. So let's have a look now at what kind of doesn't work and what does work when you want to implement using Resolve's AI Cinematic Haze. So I have a variety of different clips here that I've downloaded from the Storyblocks library, different lighting situations, different levels of movement, and so forth. So I know straight off the bat, I mean, I don't know, but I kind of have a funny idea that once I add this, it's not going to look that great. And there's a reason for this. And if we go to this shot here of a lady at the beach, and I just copy over the grade, I mean, this actually kind of has a dreamlike feel to it. So it would be great to use it for that. But in regards of sort of adding an ominous haze or mist to the shot, it doesn't really work. And the reason for that is it's similar to a day for night conversion, right? If you try to do a day for night conversion on this shot, where we have a woman in a summertime dress, she's got sunglasses on her head, the sun is in the background, and they're at a sunny location with harsh shadows, the day for night conversion is going to fall apart. And it's somewhat the same when using this haze tool. If you're in an environment that just naturally would not be hazy, then it's not necessarily going to just populate the sequence with a load of volumetric fog. It doesn't really look to work like that. So with that being said, let's go to an environment that would likely be hazy, where we have this police detective overlooking a crime scene. Let's add the tool and see how it works straight off the bat. I mean, you know what? Looking at this, I'm not seeing anything that sticks out, and I would have assumed with the leaves in the foreground and the flickering of the police tape in the background, there would have been some sort of artifacts with the level of movement, but it's held up really well. I think if I was to be overly critical, it would be that I would want more contrast or at least visibility to our lead character. So all we can do here is take down the resolution loss, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with this. This looks fantastic off the bat. So this character though is quite far away. How does it hold up when we've got a character right up close to the camera? So let's add the cinematic haze, press play. And okay, I can already see along the police detectives. I don't know what the theme is with police detectives, but we've got that on his torch. along with his elbow and shoulder. So in these instances, it's done a fairly decent job, if I turn off the node on and off, of adding this volumetric haze to the sequence, which certainly adds to the visual element of the scene. But with the sheer amount of movement and so close to the camera, it's kind of falling apart. However, we do have advanced depth controls here where we can turn on isolation and post-processing. And then basically you can spend 5 to 10 minutes here, which I'd recommend having the depth map on, in trying to figure out the target depth, and you can mess around with the tolerance and softness in order to sort of get that qualification where the lead character closest to the camera is being properly masked. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. We have a nice aerial shot now, and I kind of have the conception that the depth map might be thrown off with the fact that we're doing an aerial. Let's see. And again, I don't know, I just kind of think this looks so good. We've got a lot of haze around these lights at the bottom, kind of looks like 1970s New York. I can picture a jazz score over the top of this. And I really feel like this volumetric haze is adding a lot to it. And the way that it's working, if we turn on the depth map, we can see that the skyscrapers, oh, it's kind of a cool effect by itself. The skyscrapers are appearing gray, moving gray towards black, moving towards the camera, leaving the street level covered in haze, kind of like the premise of the Spider-Man game on the PlayStation 1. I don't know if you've ever played that. Yeah, I really like this. No nerds. Okay, so we've got this clip now. It's an alleyway at night, no movement other than no shadows. Let's see how this looks. You know, I have to say, in this instance, I'm not overly sold. I don't think that the haze really is pulling off here. So I think in this instance, this is where we'd want to look at incorporating a 2D overlay to kind of really sell the effect. Okay, so let's have a look at how we can use a traditional 2D asset like a fog overlay when the Cinematic Haze tool is just falling short ever so slightly. So here I'm on the Storyblocks library. There's a vast array of different fog overlays, and typically you're going to want to look for one where, one, it's flowing naturally, but secondly, it's already in its state of flow and hasn't just started its generation. So this one I think is going to work for me. So I'm going to download this and bring it into DaVinci Resolve. I have cleared the haze from this at the moment. I'm going to put this on after we've adjusted the haze overlay. Let's just increase the zoom ever so slightly. For the composite mode, typically for a fog overlay, we're looking at screen. Let me click play. And, you know, off the bat, there's that element of realism that's just missing. I often find the fog overlays, they're great for motion design, they're great for titles, but when it comes to trying to recreate real looking foggy and misty environments, where they fall short is now where the haze tool has its strengths. It's with the loss of clarity, the reduction of saturation, how the fog interacts with the lights themselves. This is where we can now incorporate the best of both worlds. I'm just going to change the picture of this fog so it's kind of bending inward a little bit more, so we start to see some of the fog moving more down the sequence, but that's looking okay. And then I'm just going to drop the opacity to around about 60%. Okay, so we've got that mist moving. This, in my opinion, is looking a lot more realistic, especially with some of the wisps that we can see in the sky. But again, it's missing that final touch, right? So let's click the alleyway media clip and go into Resolve, color page, and type in haze. And I think what I want to do is really focus on these lights to help sell the effect. So we're going to start messing around with the light halo parameters and try and get that nice ambient glow that you find in foggy situations. Kind of like that. I am also going to enable the light rays here and change it to from a location. I'm going to pinpoint the angle up here on this light, but you should see that it's not just this light that's adjusting or generating light rays. It's every light within the environment, but this is sort of the source of the angle. And then I'm just going to change the softness ever so slightly. Let's knock this on and off. Okay, and then I'm going to go down to air disturbance. Let's preview this. Let's go to the very first keyframe. Oh, it kind of looks like Silent Hill to a degree there. Set a keyframe, go all the way through, have the flow speed change throughout, so we've got this move in as well, if the computer wants to process it. Okay, but if we look, it is moving down, and what do we know? The asset from Storyblocks is moving left to right. So that's up to down, not left to right, Lewis. Okay, that's fine. Let's take this off. I think I would be tempted here just to slightly blend this in with the original so it's not as overpowering. Okay, then to sell this effect, all I'm going to do is go back to the edit page, create a new compound clip, then go back to the color page, type in grain. This is sort of a secret source just to sort of blend the two clips together. Change that to like 35 mil. Just bump up the opacity ever so slightly. And then just to be a little bit more dramatic, let's add some output blanking. And then in fact, what I will do, just one final touch, is turn on dynamic zoom, pull that out. Just we've got a slight bit of artificial movement, press play. You know, this looks pretty solid. So we have the best of both worlds. So there are a lot of tools that get added to software all the time, a lot of plugins, which promise to be the answer to giving you one-click results. Do I see this with this tool? Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a pretty great addition to DaVinci Resolve, and I can see myself using it a lot. But anyway, to stop me going on a tangent, I've been Lewis for Storyblocks. If you have any questions about this, drop them in the comment box below. We'll catch you next time.